Welcome to week 2. Tonight we'll be talking about chapter 3, History of Change. Once again, it's a week with only one chapter to read, which I kind of like to start out a little slowly. And after that, we'll do, naturally, our beyond the textbook, special topics and concepts. You want to be tracking those because they are testable. It often has to do with the more esoteric aspects of organizational development and change, especially systems theory and the related vernaculars of self-organizing complexity. And then we'll go over what you're supposed to be doing this week on the team project. You're forming the teams, you're talking to each other, you're trying to figure out how to produce a team charter by Sunday night. Basically, that's what you're doing. Do the best you can. The team formation and charter guidelines are self-explanatory in my opinion, but we'll still explain them, and I'll be able to add some more stuff this evening, so it'll be even clearer if all goes well. So without further ado, let's move into chapter 3, brief history of the theories of organization change. Now remember what I said last time. Burke is doing a good job with the history. Interestingly, you'll see in the history a whole bunch of stuff about leadership. You're like, well, that's not organization development and change, is it? Well, the entire history of management thought is essentially this: organization development and change in various ways. The whole idea was try to improve an organization. And at first it was like, well, Frederick Taylor, let's make it more efficient. Then you had the ergonomics movement, right? You had the Griffiths and all that. You had to redesign tasks so that you move less and you strain yourself less, and really, really basic elemental things like that. And then they got into the Hawthorne studies, and that changed everything. Because before the Hawthorne studies, it was assumed that people go to an organization, and anything that causes problems in productivity must have something to do with it's just hard to work, it's straining, they get worn out, just individual level problems. But with the Hawthorne studies, all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, people's motivation, that's a thing too. We've got to work on that, and there are ways to do it. The Hawthorne studies, you can argue, led directly to leadership studies. Not so much because the Hawthorne studies were about leadership, because they were not, but suddenly it became clear that how you treat people has an impact on how they behave, and so that naturally leads to leadership studies. And some of the earliest studies in organizational behavior were leadership. So that's what we'll get into. So let's see how this goes. All right, so scientific management, there's old Frederick Taylor again, the machine metaphor. People are in an organization and they're machine parts, in essence. Now, people think of Frederick Taylor as somehow diminishing the value of the human being. If you read what he said, he didn't say that at all. But he did think in terms of when you have people on the line, they're in a factory structure, as you usually picture in your mind. They're not there to be creative, because that was not the kinds of jobs he was looking at. Creative people would be in staff positions or managerial positions at the time. So we're talking about people who are in positions that later on you'd find machines to be able to replace them, those kinds of positions. Moving things around, spinning things, putting this on that, assembly line kinds of things. And so they say, okay, well, people are in those positions, and what you want is the people who are best able to do those jobs. Can they go all day long doing that repetitive task without falling asleep? Then that would be a better person if that's the case. If it has anything to do with strength, can they lift those objects all day long, lift those bricks all day long, whatever they are? And then beyond that, there was simply a question of, all right, well, how do you motivate the folks, and how do you design the job so that they work best? Job design ended up being a lot about ergonomics. Well, why don't we have the bricks up on this thing instead of down here? That way you don't have to dip and lift, and the basic things like that. So you had ergonomics in there. You had selection going on. Remember, you'd select people who are best for the job. A strong person to lift heavy stuff, for example. You would select people who knew math, if it was going to have anything to do with math. And so that was very simple, very basic, but you can see there's HR all over the place. So there's HR in selection, HR in training. HR implications, what Frederick Taylor was doing in the training process, you got to train them. And then there's HR in the sense of job design, even though it was all ergonomics and everything. There was a lot of HR going on in his conception. Still, we tend to look at him and we say the machine metaphor, because in a way, you're hiring people to do jobs that conceivably later on in history, a machine would be able to do those same jobs. And so the people he's looking at, the jobs he's looking at, are all machine-type jobs, the jobs that resemble machine behavior. Right? He's not looking at the creative jobs. That's not what he's after. It's all about efficiency. So the machine metaphor then depicts a physical entity with movable, replaceable parts. if you take the machine metaphor a bit further than just saying the people are doing jobs that later on in history machines will be able to do, then at some point you're like, well, something wrong with that machine part, let's replace it. So you have this assumption that you're going to get rid of somebody because the individual's not working out, replace it. Later on in history, you'd see this same kind of thought process. We'll continue to look at, I'm talking managers, leaders, by and large, continue to look at organizations as large machines. To this day, you'll still see them come in here and say, well, there's something wrong with Joe because it seems like the paperwork piles up in his cubicle and there's something wrong with that. And without looking at the systemic reasons for it, the movement of all the paperwork in this particular case, how it gets to Joe, and what Joe's supposed to do with it, if there's any ambiguity in his job, if there's any impediment that's causing this problem. Instead, they just look at Joe saying, Joe is a bad machine part, let's replace him. So that's what the machine metaphor does in our minds. And so you look nowadays and all over the place, you still find organizations, you still find people in organizations who think the organization is just a big machine, and they treat it like that. They don't think in terms of self-organizing systems, repeating cycles of events that influence each other, not thinking that. So it's may have been a bit simplistic to think along these lines. Frederick Taylor did not have it wrong, considering the kinds of jobs he was looking at, but the machine metaphor then kind of set in, and everybody was thinking like this, and continues to think like this to this day. So is it the historical context of the time? The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Well, what does that mean? The Industrial Revolution was all about building factories all over the place. And at first, before there's electricity, you had rivers, right, going by, and you'd spin things, and so you'd have textile mills. You'd have essentially the energy being pumped into the factory complex was coming from rivers. To a limited extent, there was wind here and there, but rivers were a big deal in the United States, so there's all that. And the Industrial Revolution actually hit Britain about a quarter century before it hit us. Anyway, so it was all about the factory structure. Factory structure is all about we're doing all this stuff. You got to break the jobs down into little bitty parts that people can do in a repetitive way all day long. With a lot of that. People were machine parts in the factory structure, very much so. And so, of course, the predominant organization type was manufacturing, factories, manufacturing. The methodology then that Frederick Taylor used was he gathered data. He'd say, okay, well, what are you trying to do? You're trying to improve the design of the job. So you're looking at the folks, you're watching them, you write things down, you got a little stopwatch or something, you know. You're doing this sort of thing. So time and motion studies. You've been watching people all day long. You got some ideas, and so after the work day is over with, and you continue to select a couple of guys and they continue to pay them during the time that they're there. Hey, we need you to walk through and do a few things for us. We're going to try different methods of doing this job. First, do it the normal way. We're going to time you. Okay, well, so the movement is then your arm does this, your leg does that, and you walk over here and pick up the thing there. And so you describe the whole thing. And so, okay, well. Then they reason through it. What if you tried doing this and that? Move this thing here, move that over there, let's try this. And they would do this time and motion study trying to get the most efficient approach. Efficient in terms of the time spent on it, but also efficient in terms of the human movement necessary. That was the ergonomic aspect of it. You'd discuss with workers, what do the workers think? Well, you know, if I had my way, I'd do it like this. And so they try these. That's how it went. It was all very much an individual level type of analysis. There's never anything collective or any group-based kind of thing going on. It was all one person at a time. Every job was considered something that one person should be able to do. And jobs tended to be very, very repetitive, all day long, repeating the same operation all day. You're enacting what a machine could conceivably do, but we haven't invented the machine yet, so you're going to do the old spindle, bobbin, or whatever that mechanical movement is supposed to be. And so they'd record and tabulate knowledge, rules, mathematics. It was all about that. All right, so the scientific approach is measurable and rational. You say, there, do the algebra. You know, somebody was asking me recently, in fact, what Plato was saying about these. You know, when you draw a circle, it's a representation of this abstract, kind of spooky, pure circle in space someplace in your mind, and you're just doing a representation. And I said, well, that makes perfect sense. He said, no, it doesn't. There's no spooky pure circle and pure square and pure cube out there floating around someplace. No, it's in your mind. When you do your algebra, you're working with pure properties, pure angles, right? What you want is when you saw the wood and put it in, you want it to approximate as much as possible the perfection on paper. So that's the scientific method. There's a sense of the calculations are down to mathematical certainty. And then you're building, you're putting bricks on things and wood and whatever, and that's supposed to approximate as closely as possible. Now it's shave a little off because it's not exact, right? You want it to be exact. So the integration of science and work is what constitutes scientific management. Select, train, and incentivize workers empirically. In the incentivized part, you'd have, for example, a situation in which there'd be several workers in a room all doing the same thing, repeated all in different stations. And then the top workers, the ones who did the most, if it happens to be that kind of structure, you come up with this very simple, hang a piece of wood there of a certain color that shows you're the best. And that creates a kind of like competition. As long as the environment is right, it can work, although it's a little basic. But there was that out there. That was the incentivized thing. Incentives then were very transactional. There was no inspiring going on. There was no actual leadership in this kind of structure. Treat workers well, but remove or relocate the non-compliant. So the redivision of the work of business, divide work into two levels. This has persisted since that time. Workers and management. And nowadays we'll say, well, management and leadership, but management and leadership overlap so much that it's kind of it's more of a role thing than a job thing. Right now I'm doing something managerial. Look, here I am refining the edges, doing some calculations and stuff. Now I'm doing some leadership. I'm trying to inspire people. So the same person will take one or the other role these days. But back then it was workers and management. And that had an enormous impact on how even legislation, pretty soon, it didn't take too long before all of a sudden everybody's thinking in terms of either your management or your worker. That's it. Whereas if you go earlier into the 1800s in the United States, there was a pervasive philosophy of work that every human being is somebody with a brain and two arms, and you can do stuff, and you're free to do whatever you want to do to make money. So everybody's a walking, talking little business. Well, you can organize with folks and make your business a collective and structure and more people in there, but the fact is every individual is supposed to be a business. And that was reflected in the application of the Sherman Act. If you go to think about it, 1890, the Sherman Act was like, all right, guys, you can't collude anymore. And then when the Supreme Court decided they were going to apply the Sherman Act to something, they applied it to labor instead of corporations so much. So they said, all right, that means labor, you can't collude. Why? Because labor is a bunch of walking, talking little businesses with arms and brains. So with this workers versus management, it seeps into the culture, into the legislation, into the arguments and everything. And pretty soon people are like, I got to get a job. Instead of, I got to create a living for myself, it's in my mind, I got to get a job. Now everybody thinks that way. I got to get a job, instead of I got to create a living for myself. So managers keep collecting and analyzing data to plan work, and they equip workers with necessary tools, resources. In this structure, workers are machine parts in a manner of speaking. You can see how that works. Okay, then we get to the infamous Hawthorne studies. This is called that because it was the Hawthorne works in Chicago through the mid-20s to into the 30s. This is a big deal. This established a whole bunch of our assumptions about how people behave in organizations. So it was a Western electric company. The most famous experiments were the illumination experiments. They changed lighting in various ways. There was a female unit, right? And so they go in there, and then while people are watching them, right, with little clipboards and things, somebody's turning up the lights. Maybe if they see better, they'll work better, right? Okay. Oh, look, they're working better. Writing it all down, They're measuring the productivity at the end of the day and all that stuff. And then they said, well, okay, now they started turning the light downward. Now there's less and less light. The same thing happened as the productivity increased. And that's when it occurred to them, it wasn't about the physical environment much at all. There is a place for that, but not at this level. They're already able to work. They're already able to do the stuff they need to do. As soon as you're paying attention to them, though, all of a sudden they kind of wake up and realize it, and they feel different about how they work. They work harder. It's not just, they're watching, I better work harder. There might be a little element of that, but it was more like somebody's paying attention to them. People behave differently when someone's paying attention to them. So that was the beginning of, how we treat workers is going to have an influence on what they do. There are experiments in the relay assembly group, conclusion, worker attitudes, regulate employee output. The Hawthorne effect is you observe people and they behave differently. That's the Hawthorne effect. You observe them and they act different. If you don't observe them, whatever. As soon as you observe them, they act different. So the observation influences the object of analysis. Anyway, so the experiments in the relay assembly group, that was telephone part assembly. The conclusion there was independence and autonomy benefit productivity. So it was a different kind of experiment a little bit. In that particular one there, they had this question of when people had to be able to perform anything requiring a little creativity, solving their own problems, if it was that kind of job, that kind of task, then if they're being watched, they'll hesitate to be inventive. But if you give them autonomy, put up curtains or something so they can work on their own, then they'll be inventive, right? So another aspect of it. It's very important stuff. This guy down here, by the way, Mayo, 1945, he wrote up this whole thing like he knew what he was talking about. Actually, he was wrong about his conclusions, just so you know. Further experiments: bank wiring group studies, the mail unit, wiring, soldering, communications equipment, psychological factors, group norms, informal organization. Here we have autonomy, job feedback, the performance reward link, and choices all being a part of. You see what's going on here? Autonomy. It's me and my mind and how much freedom do I have to solve my own problems. Job feedback. Do I understand my job well enough so that when I do a good job, I can tell? Or do I have to wait till somebody tells me, is this good or not? So if we get really into job design right here, autonomy then later on becomes one of the 5 common factors of good job design. You get the right amount of autonomy for that type of job and that person. Job feedback. Feedback must be coming from the job, so the job has to be such that the individual who's occupying that role can really tell immediately, I built that birdhouse and I can tell it's a good birdhouse. That's the reference to building a birdhouse is important, because when you build a birdhouse, you know immediately if it's good or not. You can already tell. And that's the kind of job design this suggests. The performance reward link, there's a question of what kind of reward people are after. We tend to think of external rewards. Well, if you do a good job, I'll give you a raise. Maybe I'll do a good job. But there are other kinds of rewards as well. In terms of psychological factors, the real reward is if the job is really fulfilling, you really love it, then the reward is doing a good job from your own perception instead of waiting for somebody to pay you something. The strong motivator, in fact, I try carefully to avoid saying motivator because you'll see later on, Hertzberg came and said, you know what, human beings are motivated in a way that animals are not. Let's stop using this word motivation to refer to the animal type, where you give them a piece of cheese, get them to do something. That's that external incentive. So you can say incentivized, but the external incentive is there. But say motivated. Now, reserve motivated for when leaders inspire you, so that the communication, what the leaders are enabling you to think and imagine, is lighting a fire inside you, and so all of a sudden now you want to do these great things. Call that motivation. We'll get more of that later. Okay, then the Hawthorne effect simply says the observation per se affects how people behave. It's an example of the observer effect more generally, and there's a lot of ways in which you can observe something, and by observing it, you affect it. In physics, you have that as well. If you subatomic physics, if you happen to be like using an electron microscope, as soon as you activate it to see all these little subatomic particles, you're affecting what the subatomic particles do. So it's weird, but it's also interestingly inherent in the system's conceptualization of organization. As soon as you're observing, you realize the observation affects the outcome. And he said, well, it can't be like, well, we need them to perform really well, so let's observe them all the time. We'll just stand there and watch them while they work. That won't work. You see, there's too much of this feedback, these looping things going on for you to be able to manage it that way. But the fact is that when you observe, it has an impact on what you observe. Okay, then we get into industrial psychology. Here's where, you see, that goes through the 30s, right? And then people are like all through the 30s and 40s, and then the war happens. Actually, the war did something when it happened. It suddenly made it important to consider, are there better ways to pick potential leaders or not? And so you found the Hawthorne studies, how you treat people influences how they behave. The war starts putting a whole bunch of emphasis on how do we pick good leaders, and all of a sudden you have this. So by the time you get to Fleischmann, 1953, getting stuff coming from the 40s, we found two main leadership factors. Any of you who's taken a leadership course, you know that these 2 factors are so famous, they are so universal, they're so valid. There's always 2, and they get different names. It doesn't matter. One is always how much you emphasize the task itself. The needs of the task is one way to put it. How much do you emphasize the task needs? So I don't care about the person, just the task. The task needs to be attended to correctly. Okay, then the other one is how much you attend to the person's needs. That's what they are. So initiating structure is what we call the first one. You say, is that initiating structure or is it initiating structure? It depends on who you listen to. It's a funny term, but it's the task orientation. You say, look, dude, here's how you sweep the floor. First, you take the broom, you do this, right? If you're showing them how to do the task, that's part of initiating structure. And then, if you then you say, now please do this entire area with the broom. That's part of initiating structure too. So you got two aspects of it that are not really important to make the distinction, but the fact is, one is showing them how to do it, two is telling them to do it. So initiating structure is basically I'm telling you what to do kind of approach to leadership. There are certain subdomains of the workplace in which telling somebody what to do is the thing that makes sense. For example, every time you have an emergency situation, doesn't matter how smart you are, if you're not the person, you're not the top dog, you realize in an emergency, it's most expedient to give the power of decision making to one top dog. Do this, do that, do this, right? And so that's what you do. So you may be really smart, but you're not top dog, so you're like, yes sir, I'll do it. You run off and do the thing, and you're very compliant. But that's an emergency situation. Also, dangerous situations, construction sites. Get off that ladder, Somebody's supposed to tell you what to do because construction sites are dangerous. So dangerous or emergency situations are structural types, structural subdomains of work life that naturally lend themselves to high initiating structure without that consideration thing. Now, consideration is the other thing. Of course, you call it consideration. What does that mean? Show me a little consideration. That's the common meaning of the term, and that's pretty close to what we mean here. Leader sensitivity to worker needs and feelings. The outcome is training to improve consideration. So what Fleischman and some of his other folks were figuring out pretty quickly was that people in leadership positions, people managerial /leadership positions, had no problem telling people what to do, showing them how to do it. This is a natural byproduct of coming out of that machine age, as it were, the factory structure. You create jobs, you tell people how to do it. In fact, people, they sign up to work for you, and then they're like waiting for you to tell them what to do. Okay, so it makes sense. It all works. But they tended to have trouble with the consideration part. They're like, I have to do what? Well, you have to talk to them like they're humans and stuff, and kind of keep track and find out how they're doing and this sort of thing. Oh, really? I got to do that, huh? And so there was a lot of this training that would focus on that, trying to get them to show consideration better. Now, this is interesting. So you had all these training sessions. These various companies out there, you're consulting with them and you're showing them, here's how you do it, here's how you engage with the interaction with the people, here's some tips. And at first you'd see the supervisors would be like, they're doing a good job. You get they're measuring it with scales and stuff. Yeah, my supervisor's great, he talks to me and everything. But then they would come back just to make sure that the study thing, results were working. They come back and measure periodically, every couple of weeks or something, and measure it again. And eventually what they found was after the supervisors were doing a really gangbusters kind of job, showing great consideration, everything, and they started, without constant training, without constant pressure to keep doing this, without a change in the culture, they started reverting gradually back to not just what they were before, because that would be simplistic. They reverted back to what their supervisors' attitudes and behaviors suggested, their own supervisors. So the supervisors who learned great consideration, they were doing a good job for a while, eventually they're pushed back, again, not to their own baseline, but to resemble more their own supervisors. That's a really important object lesson, because later on, much later in history, we would discover in the fractal structure of organizations how that kind of a layering effect occurs. You got all these great ideas, you're hired to be in a subordinate leadership position, you go into that unit, everybody's breath of fresh air, oh, finally somebody's going to communicate with us, we hated that previous manager of ours, and you're like, I'm going to show how it's done. And then over time, you don't realize it, but in really weird, various subtle ways, your leadership behavior starts conforming to that of whoever's above you. And inside you, what's going on? Oh, frustration. Oh, if only I don't have time for that. Well, this, that, this. Well, sometimes they might be explicit about, don't do that to your subordinates. Most of the time it'd be like, they're just not giving you any leeway. The point is that whatever the complex psychological processes happen to be, the pressure is for you to conform to the leadership style, the core aspects of leadership style of your own superiors. Pressure is pervasive. It's just everywhere. It gets you. And so we see this thing happen all the time where great start and then over time something happens. It's really weird, but it makes perfect sense when you understand the fractal structure of organizations. So realign with bosses, not reverted to their original state, but realign with bosses. Okay, here are the two leadership factors depicted in a little 2x2. There's initiating structure in the horizontal axis. We normally put it down there. We call it task orientation or initiating structure or job centrism, whatever. It's all about the needs of the task, not the needs of the person. And the vertical axis, we always say consideration or people oriented or person oriented or one of these other words, the needs of the person. So the needs of the person. Depending on the type of subordinate you have, someone who needs to learn a lot versus somebody who's very experienced, for example, and the type of workplace that you have, one that's really fluid and not structured at all, or one that's highly structured where it's a bunch of repetitive tasks, these kinds of differences, you're going to have a different mix of initiating structure and consideration. So you'll have down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it says directing task accomplishment. The directive style of leadership. Employees need guidance and direction to apply their efforts in ways necessary to support the organization's conception of mission requirements. Okay, so that directive style is needed in certain places. And when you get into Hershey and Blanchard, Hershey and Blanchard. Hershey's the name of a candy bar. Hershey and Blanchard. You'll see that they focus a lot on the needs of the employee. The person who needs to learn a lot, that's a type, they have a certain type they're going to label the employee, and that person therefore needs directive. That's true, but again, you can't ignore the type of workplace either. Anyway, so the opposite of the directive approach is the upper left-hand corner, which is so-called building emotional commitment. Employees already know what to do and how to do it, but they need to feel valued as partners in the organization, not just obedient workers. So you treat them like human beings, treat them with respect and that sort of thing. It's not just, psychoanalyzing them, you're treating them with respect. Now, the upper left-hand corner, that's a place where people are the subordinates are so adept that you can kind of share the whole leadership thing with them to some extent. Like you have committees are essentially groups of equals. Committees are supposed to be flat structures, not supposed to be anybody really lording over everybody, even though they often do that anyway. They're not supposed to be little hierarchies. It's supposed to be like teams. And a team, you're not supposed to have somebody who's telling other people what to do. You can't do that. It's the flattest structure possible. But in that kind of structure, you're trying to share leadership in various ways. So people are participating in this leadership process. Upper right-hand corner, you have this combo. Guiding, motivating, challenging. Employees are individually capable in their respective roles, but they need a coach to help them integrate their efforts for maximum effectiveness. We often say coaching for that one because it gives you the clearest depiction of coaching. It's like a coach, a football team. Yeah, they all know what they're doing, but there's somebody's got to coordinate the big picture. Somebody's got to do the strategizing and stuff. And then you got to have that motivation thing going on. Makes sense. In the bottom left-hand corner is interesting. That would be creating space and letting go. In some sense, employees are individually capable in their respective roles and can work as a team, but you need to give them space and freedom from distraction. And that ends up mutating into a couple of different things later. Hershey and Blanchard would call that one delegative leadership. House would call that one, it's Robert House, not the guy from the show. House would call that one achievement-oriented leadership for good reason. Anyway, let's continue. So we have our approach. Survey feedback was how they did. You create these surveys. You subject to survey. It's a list of questions. In fact, when you're creating a survey, a whole list of questions. Hey, let's ask a bunch of questions that try to assess: are you an effective leader? And we'll ask all different ways. Do you make me feel good about my work? Are you clear about your instructions? Just anything you can think of. You put that down. A bunch of questions. Actually, see, look at Likert down there in the bottom, Likert's Institute. Rensis Likert came up with this, what we call the Likert scale. And what he said was like, well, you don't ask them questions. You don't say, does your leader do this? You say, they're descriptions of attitudes. My leader does this, strongly disagree, strongly agree, everything in between. You circle a number. And so everything's a statement with which you can agree or disagree or be somewhere in the middle. So that's what we started doing. Now then you take you use the survey, let's say all your trial questions, all those questions you brainstorm, and you give them to a bunch of folks to take, and then you get all these answers back. All these different people gave all these different numbers to these questions. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. And then you subject them to factor analysis, and then you refine the scale. You boot out items that the factor analysis, the statistics will tell you if an item is just, nobody understands that item very well, even though you thought they would. So you just kick it out. And then pretty soon, the factor analysis also group items together based on commonalities, psychological commonalities. And then you end up with a refined scale. Then you use these refined scales in all your work. One thing you can do with a scale is ask subordinates, is your leader a good leader or not? But you're doing it in a psychologically solid way, something that's been proven to work. You'll find organizations still to this day where people are in charge of, let's say, HR, and they don't know what they're doing in terms of this stuff. They think, well, a scale, you just have a list of items and then you say scale of 1 to 10 or something. So they just invent stuff. You'll see some well-established organizations, maybe not the biggest ones, but some in the middle that are pretty well-established in their own way, with absolutely lousy sense of how to put together a proper survey. If you can't put together a proper survey with proper statistical properties, then you can't really figure out what's going on in your organization. You can only assume, well, I think that means this because we wrote it that way. So that's a really important thing to watch out for. So in the leadership questionnaires, the Ohio State University studies, that was one of them that gave us, and the Michigan studies. So we have two different kinds of studies that gave us the same thing, 2 dimensions, consideration, initiating structure, or people-oriented, task-oriented, whatever they want to call it. They found the same thing, 2 different places around the same time. They weren't consulting each other, they just found the same exact 2 dimensions of leadership in both cases. Whenever you have independent sources in their own ways coming up with what amounts to the same model, the same theoretical model, there's a lot of validity in there. They're cross-validating each other. They're telling you this is really valid, this is really true. It isn't just my theory and nobody else can prove it, right? You're getting validation. Kurt Lewin was in Likkert's Institute. Of course, he's our great Gestalt theorist. He gave us the most pervasive representation of the organization change model. But they use the organizational survey feedback method. Organizational diagnosis, group dynamics. How do you diagnose an organization? You go in there and first you talk to the folks. So, yeah, you think this, huh? Okay. Yeah, well, what we want to do, you're the outsider, the consultant. They're the insider. So we want to use pass out some surveys to some of your people, right, with your authorization. We'll do this. We'll have HR, they'll distribute them, let's say, or something. And so people all of a sudden, whoa, look at this big old couple of pieces of paper of a bunch of questions. Okay, well, boss says I got to do this. It's all right. So you start circling all these answers and you turn them in. And then they would compile all these things and very dutifully just sit there, typing all of these responses and the numbers, and then they were tabulating all the data using matrix algebra to do essentially what amounts to a very tedious factor analysis by hand. Happily, when I got to my doctoral program, I didn't have to do that because we had computers at that time, but my supervisor had to do it by hand. He was really proud of it too. It took him forever to do that. Anyway, so we figure out what's going on in the organization by looking at these surveys. Surveys can tell you how the leadership is, good or bad, and how people's perceptions are, and all sorts of things, attitudes, all over the place. Surveys. The chart shows that people's attitudes are like this, and maybe you do it later on. Okay, today after our changes, now they're like this, and you can show the stuff on the board. That was the whole point of these things. Surveys systematically assessed employee morale and attitudes in organizations. Attitudes were a big deal. Attitudinal surveys that's like the entire be-all and end-all of the survey method. It was all about attitudes back then. What's an attitude? Do you like your organization? Do you have a sense of organizational commitment? That's an attitude. Do you like your boss? Do you like your coworkers? That's an attitude. Do you like your job? That's an attitude. Do you like whatever? Or do you dislike whatever? Those are all attitudes. So, evolution of the survey feedback method. Results of this method improve managerial performance. Here's what we're doing. Now we're sitting down with the managers and we're showing them the results, like on a board or something, right? Maybe bring in some butcher paper, scribble it on a whiteboard. Nowadays you can use a PowerPoint presentation or something. And you show them the results. And you say, look, yeah, okay, so, and we'll go through this training and we'll train you all to show more consideration, let's say, and then later on they show, oh, see, look, those numbers are better. So it had a big impact. This survey feedback method, basically explaining to managers what's going on, empirically instead of guessing, had a big impact on success in these operations. So employee perceptions of several variables, that's what you'd measure. All participants received the same summary feedback. Interlocking chain of conferences was an interesting layering thing. I don't think it's extremely important, but this is how they did it. They would start out by giving survey feedback to the top level people, and then they would train those top level people. Okay, now relate the same feedback to the next level down, and so forth and so on, all the way down. It was an interesting, efficient operation. So here we have a profile of organizational characteristics. So it was Likert in 1967. He has 6 sections in his survey, the survey that he used. Now each survey, let's say there's a leadership survey right there. It could have a dozen items in it. Once you refine it, you might be able to boil it down to maybe half a dozen items for a particular aspect of leadership. But leadership is, you got those two axes, so it's going to be at least half a dozen here, half a dozen there. And a lot of times it's 8 or 10. These can be pretty long surveys. Imagine it's a dozen items for leadership, motivation, communication, decisions, goals, and control. And all of them, you're asking a bunch of questions. Why are you asking a bunch of questions instead of just one question? Hey, how good is leadership? Because the response patterns to a list of questions is going to get at the psychological substrate behind your attitudes, as opposed to just asking you off the top of your head what you think about something. Your actual psychology is going to be revealed in a list of items that have already been statistically validated. So Likert comes out with this, I'm measuring all these things, and it's tedious, and you always worry about people getting lazy and responding, all the usual stuff. They came up with 4 system types. There's such thing as the autocratic organization, where the boss tells you what to do, benevolent autocracy, where the boss who tells you what to do, but is nice to you at the same time. There's consultative, participative. Now, this is leadership emphasizing right here, even though he's measuring all these things. This is getting at those 4 quadrants of leadership. It's already moving that direction. This participative management would be like upper left-hand quadrant, for example. Consultative management would be upper right-hand quadrant. Autocratic would be lower right-hand quadrant. And benevolent autocratic, if that's what you want to call it, which is a funny thing to call it. But anyway, bottom left-hand corner. But so you can kind of see it's already moving in the direction of the 2x2, solidifying that structure. And then survey feedback, of course, is powerful tool based on data. It involves organization members directly. Focuses change on the larger system, not on the individuals. Instead of saying, all right, I'm Frederick Taylor, I'm going to get these individuals to conform to what works best. Instead, now you're getting the whole organization to conform to what works best, and you're influencing individuals that way. So you can see the focal point changed. Then we get into a few more kinds of training. This is all good historical stuff. Kurt Levine's training workshop, 1946. There's lectures, there's role plays, group discussions. Why would you do role play? You want to show consideration. You need to kind of practice it. All right, now show Joe some consideration. Oh, okay, yeah. Accordingly, I'm supposed to say this. Hey, Joe, how's your dog? Whatever they tell you, you want to practice it so that you get good at it. So there's role play. Group discussion, you had the people kind of talking. Yeah, when I went in there, I was thinking this. Oh, really? Well, I was thinking that people, there's questions going back and forth, and it opens up people's minds into what's really going on, as opposed to continuing to act based on assumptions and not thinking about anything. So it's like metacognition. Small group discussions, there were sensitivity training, T groups, called training groups. T groups were really interesting. Training groups, self-awareness, educational vehicles for individual change. In a T group, you normally have this, a group of people who normally work together. So it could be a team, or it could just be a group of people who always work in the same unit. They know each other, they're good friends of each other. But most of the time, a T group is of value when it's a team-like structure. There's movement of a task or parts of a task among the people. I'm doing this, I finish my part, I hand it off to Fred, he does that, he finishes it. There's some kind of movement. Or it could be a lot of dynamic discussions, as long as the people are working together. The T group gets people to say, okay, now a safe environment. So show me a problem. Well, yeah, the other day Joe did this, and that just drove me nuts. Well, what happened? Well, and then you found, because I thought Joe was like thinking this, and Joe said, well, I wasn't thinking that at all. All of a sudden, here comes all that stuff. The assumptions come out. And people are like, well, I had no idea you were thinking that. You should have told me, blah, blah, blah. They're very, very effective. If you want to do a good T group, you want to find somebody from outside the organization to come in and do it. And it's you're not working during that time. You're just in a group, and somebody's asking you questions. and you're getting at this interesting social psychology. Socio-technical systems, Tavistock Institute, London, late 1940s. They're studying group relations. It's like the T group in a sense, but with a consultant instead of a trainer, so no biggie. Diffusion of innovative work practices. The new work paradigm was a socio-technical system. What was really going on here? Well, first, a socio-technical system in this structure was a self-managed work team. It seems to me they were working on extracting coal or something having to do with extraction of some kind. Anyway, there are tools involved, and there's a group of people. If the group of people is allowed to work on their own without being bugged by anybody, just get the work done. You know what the work is, and then they're talking to each other. They're solving problems as they run into them because everything's working. And what was observed was, well, they work a whole lot better than if somebody else is telling the group constantly what to do or watching them and holding them to task. So the group ends up accomplishing a lot more. What's going on? Well, the group is an open system of its own kind. They're calling it socio-technical because they're observing, well, there's people involved, so there's behaviors and interaction behavior, but there's also tools, equipment and stuff. And so, well, the open system isn't just the people, it's the people and the tools mixed. It's all one blob. And you can't understand the socio-technical system by breaking it down further and saying, let me just talk to one person. I mean, unless the one person is talking about the system, about the group. So the unit of analysis, the basic unit of analysis in a socio-technical system is a group of people with tools. It's not individuals. You're not going to learn anything by studying one individual. You're going to learn things only by studying the whole group as a group. That's the unit. That was a really interesting observation. You say, well, in terms of self-organizing complexity, what you're looking at is an emergent structure. At the level of the group, a structure emerges such that studying what's going on among the individuals or with regard to the tools isn't helping you very much. In order to understand the group, though, it's harder because you have to look at the whole group. The whole group is a bunch of people interacting. It's just, you can't just give them a survey as a group, right, and have them respond as a group. It's tough, but still, that's the basic unit of analysis. So that's the primary work system. That's what I say right here. The primary work system is the self-managed work team, the socio-technical system, as an organizational subsystem. It's embedded in superordinate systems, organizations, divisions. Okay, so you have individuals that you can learn about their personalities, motivation, and stuff. Then you have this group, we're calling it a socio-technical system. That's an emergent level of analysis. It's kind of a team, really. And then from there you get the organization, next level up. It might be a division of an organization or something, but it's a bigger unit. And at some point you get to the outer boundary of the organization. And these are your emergent levels in the structure. And then you can keep on going if you want to. Macro, social sectors, communities, institutions, if you want to keep on doing this superordinate system thing. We talked about that last time. Okay, so then we have this idea of organization development. So what is that? The small T group action, they started using that and doing a really good job with it among ESSO managers, the oil companies in Louisiana and Texas. Did a lot of team building. How do you do team building? Well, one way to do it is do T groups. Why? Well, because the assumptions are, people unwind, they unravel their assumptions pretty soon. They understand each other, they work better. So you build a team that way. That's team building. Socio-technical systems change the effort. Douglas McGregor, late 1950s. McGregor is important because he came up with this idea of theory X versus theory Y, so he jumps in there. Improving teamwork, decision-making on the shop floor, called their approach organization development. So the term organizational development came from McGregor at that time. Theory X, theory Y, you might remember this from organizational behavior. Theory X is simply an approach, an attitude that you take on as management in an organization where you assume people, they're going to try to get away with things if you don't watch them. So how you treat them ends up creating that effect. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Theory Y is you believe people are at work because they're trying to do a good job, and they would if you let them, right? And so then you treat them differently, and then they tend to act that way instead. So it was an interesting approach. It still has a lot of validity. You walk in with the wrong assumptions, and the wrong assumptions will influence how people behave. Then we have TRW systems, early 60s, the first long-term OD efforts at team building. So Harwood Weldon, action research. So action research is a type of OD, and it involves, well, this little sequence I got right here. Diagnosis, feedback, discussion, action. The point is action research involves studying the organization, figuring stuff out, taking action to influence it, and then keep on measuring it. You see, the interesting thing about it is like it's called research, but you're not just researching the organization. I mean, let's study how people behave in this organization. We'll do a paper on it. You're studying how they behave, then you're changing it, and then you're studying it again. That sounds funny, but to us it makes a big difference when you think in those terms. Studying the organizational problem and solving it. Diagnosis, feedback, discussion, action, of course. Diagnosis, interviews, surveys, observations, analysis, stuff we just talked about. Then you give feedback, summary reporting to everyone, the top people, whatever, here's what's going on. And then notice right here, diagnosis, feedback, discussion, action. The action comes last in this sequence, but obviously there's something after. You still want to measure the effectiveness and all the usual stuff. But that's basically it. Discussion, sharing ideas, planning solutions. You get the assent of management. Action, you go ahead and intervene in the right ways. Okay, so agreed then. We're going to reorganize these groups over here, retrain these guys over here, replace these people over here. You have the whole plan worked out. Because obviously the external consultant wouldn't be able to do that, all that HR stuff, without permission from the organization. So it becomes a team thing. And then we get the managerial grid, that creepy thing. There's Blake and Mouton. A structured approach to individual change. So they relabeled the familiar two leadership dimensions. They just gave them different names. One's called production, one's called people. So no big. It doesn't change anything. It's just different names. Always happens. Then they arrange the two factors in a 9x9 graph. What are they trying to do? They want to do the usual, give everybody a survey, give all the leadership a survey, and come back and then write down what kind of, on average, what number it is. And they'll say, okay, our point is, so you're a 2-5. There's a number on each axis, right? We need to turn you into a 9-9. It's always that. It's always what they're trying to do. So they measure them in this really specific kind of way, with the point being they can show them as they make progress toward their 9-9 measurement. So they're trying to go for 9-9. Then I have it described here, and I have this little guy on the right-hand side who's got this like perplexed look on his face, because there's not a lot of problems. But let's just work through it right now. They called it the managerial grid originally. Later on, when leadership became really popular, they changed their mind, so let's call it the leadership grid. So, anyway, you should already see some issues with it. Concern for people, concern for results, fine, that's great. You can call it that if you want to. You know, the horizontal axis is task orientation, the vertical axis is person orientation. The point is that the authority compliance management, there's your directive style of leadership, that's in the bottom right-hand corner. That's okay, it sort of fits. Blake and Mouton don't act like that makes sense to do. They think that's wrong, it's somehow suboptimal. And as I said, it depends on your subordinates, the nature of your subordinates. It depends on the workplace structure. Sometimes you need to do that, right? Then upper left-hand corner, country club management, really a dumb thing to call it, but they weren't trying to, they didn't think it was a good way to manage. They just thought that people are leaning back and letting people do what they want to do, which is not right at all. But that is how they describe it. Country club management. Thoughtful attention to the needs of the people, friendly atmosphere. This country club thing is just the wrong thing to call it. Team management they thought was the best. They called out the 9-9. Bottom left-hand corner they call it impoverished management, because they just couldn't think of what goes there. And then middle of the road management is kind of a dumb thing. So here's why. Here's my little take on it. The scoring system on the bottom left-hand corner, scoring system is too precise for complex social-psychological dynamics. They didn't know it back then, but it's like, well, yeah, but it's really convincing. We show management with the scores. So, look, here's your score. We're going to turn you into a 9-9. They're like, oh, okay. And you're nodding. Like, that must be true, because you've got a Ph.D. and everything. And so that's how they got really specific. The fact is, we can't be that precise. In reality, I guess we can fool people and make them think that here's the average. We're going to fix it from there. Anyway, so we have upper left-hand corner. I said some labels create false impressions. Bottom left-hand corner, there's this impoverished management idea, making it look as though there's no reason for the bottom left-hand corner to be a thing any place, and yet there is. Especially when Robert House gets a hold of it. He really shows us. Upper left-hand corner, country club management, again, false impression, as though that's somehow defective. The one in the middle, bottom right-hand corner, I have this explanation. Middle category is empirically problematic. This is true of any 2x2 conceptual matrix due to the effects of respondent uncertainty or haste in completing the surveys. You're like, well, of course, a 5-5 or something goes in the middle. Yeah, well, but you can't tell this is valid. You should not put anything in the middle. If you ever see one of these 2x2s and somebody sticks something in the middle, you're like, you know what? I can see you can decide to call it something because it sort of kind of makes sense superficially, but empirically it doesn't work. So how would that be? Well, you give the survey to a bunch of folks, and a bunch of them come back, and let's say they're like, they didn't really care, they just circled all the middle number on the surveys, or let's say they were confused about some of the questions, or it's a mixture. Some people were serious, some people weren't. Just a really bad mixture. Ends up coming out somewhere near the 5-5 position. Why? Because people were lazy, or they didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't have any time. They didn't take the survey seriously. It was something like this. Yeah, but that's not really necessarily the style of management going on. There are too many other factors that can explain people winding up in the middle. And this is why, by the way, when you take the PLSI and you get one of these ties, you get a tie on there. The tie is at least as much a consequence of not maybe fully understanding the items or being iffy about something or hitting fatigue or something as anything else. And so when you hit a tie in a PLSI, the natural consequence is you pick whichever of those choices is rarer, because if you pick what's more common, then essentially you would be treating everybody to this kind of everybody's middle of the road management kind of thing, if you understand what I'm saying. In the upper right hand corner, incorrect assumption that there is one best way to lead a group of people. So there are a lot of problems with this managerial grid, but at least you know it's there. It exists. And so they would do so grid OD, we're doing organization development using the grid, and so they would do this thing. It was very, very structured, overly structured in my opinion. Barriers to organizational effectiveness, communication problems due to poor supervision and management. That was our assumption. They were looking for that. And if they perfected it, they would like put you, suddenly you'd be a 9-9, like magic. Lack of planning due to faulty organizational strategies. So 6 managerial training phases. Phase 1, train managers up to 9-9. They give themselves like a business week to do that, which is interesting. So at least for a while, they're enacting the 9-9 thing. Phase 2, develop a framework based on phase 1, then develop intergroup relations, develop a strategic corporate model, and going on and on. It's a little bit heavy structure. It's very mechanistic, but that's what they do. That's what they do. Okay, then we get finally this management consulting. Here's McKinsey, started in Chicago around 1923. They emphasize this thing called professional practice. They emphasize these 3 facets of it: respectability, professionalism, reputation. Facts are friendly. The McKinsey folks, they're one of the big consulting firms. We have the Boston Consulting Group, we have McKinsey, we have Bain, right? So these big consulting firms, the thing that they would do right that made them really successful is they would go in and when they diagnose, they're not just doing a bunch of surveys, they're doing a bunch of surveys, and they're looking at the books big time, and they know exactly what they're looking at when it comes to the books. And so because they can actually change fix the financial structure so well, they can have an enormous impact on overall organization development. But of course, it includes actual OD properties, it's training leaders and moving leaders around, that sort of thing. So it's very effective. It's a strict problem-solving process for McKinsey. Later consultancies would emulate this pattern. The consultancies, as I said, Boston Consulting Group and Bain and Company and these people. First, gather facts related to the organization problem. Treat data as symptoms of an underlying problem, the root cause. Use interviews, company records, customer surveys, and financial records. And so that is essentially it. That's our history of OD. Notice what we had. We start out with Frederick Taylor, scientific management, move into the Hawthorne works, and suddenly we have the humanistic school, people tend to call it. We understand that people's motivations and attitudes need to be considered. Right? And then World War II happens, and we move quickly into leadership studies, and everybody agrees that those two axes, that's all of leadership is on those 2 axes in some sense. We're just missing charismatic stuff, by the way. Charismatic leadership isn't really there, but you'll see that later. And then we get this survey feedback method becomes a big deal. There's Likert. He comes into his own. Now we call it the Likert scale every time you see one of those scales. And then we end up with Levine and his training workshops. Levine, of course, becomes the big organization change theorist of all time. And we have our T groups and everything. Socio-technical systems, you know what that is. We're going to touch on that again in a second. And then we have our creepy managerial grid, and then finally, management consulting. So with that said, let's take a little break, and then we'll move into beyond the textbook. Okay, moving on to beyond the textbook. Here's some extra little tidbits. If I can find it. There we go. All right, the first interesting topic is fractality. There's the Hansen video. So I asked you to do this. Consider Dr. Hansen's explanation of fractality and how does this conception help us understand organization, development, and change. Well, fractality, well, it's in nature, and you see ferns and rivers and all sorts of things, but it's also an organizational structure. And it makes sense if you think about this. Every self-organizing entity, that kind of self-organizing complexity, features fractality. How do you know? Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but if you say, well, just take a tree, for example, is that self-organizing or not? Well, yes, it is. Self-organizing how? Well, it follows fractal patterns. The fractal patterns in different kinds of entities will have different rules of fractality. They all have fractality, but the rules of fractality may be different. You know, a tree structure or lightning bolts or rivers, that's about as loose, let's say, as wide open fractality as you can get. So it looks very tree-like, no matter what it is. Then you get tighter fractal structures like ferns that follow, the rules are stricter, they repeat themselves the exact same way, but they're tighter, so they look like ferns. Or they look like crystals or something. These are all fractal structures as well. And crystals, of course, they are also self-organizing systems. And that's why I said complexity theory actually stemmed not from biology. Systems theory stemmed from biology originally. Complexity theory stemmed from chemistry and physics, well, chemistry mostly. So they studied crystals and things. And they didn't realize in both those different domains they were studying the same thing but using different words. But it shows you that there can be, that even though most of our self-organizing systems seem to be animate in nature, there are some inanimate ones as well, like crystals. So I say this, fractal structures feature repeating developmental patterns across levels of analysis. That's the point, levels of scale or levels of analysis. We already referred to them as levels of analysis. We have individuals, and we have groups, and we have superordinate entities over groups. Maybe the organization, maybe there's an intermediate entity there, but it's wherever there's an emergent structure, that's a level of analysis. So well, fractal structures repeat themselves across these. So these patterns track the main lines of dynamic flow. Energy, resources, information, pressure, whatever that flow is. In organizations, the upper hierarchy transmits conforming influence to lower levels, molding the latter in its image. This is that problem of you join the organization and everybody in your unit is all raring to go because they're just so happy to find somebody who's a breath of fresh air, because you're obviously a person who's personable and you don't act like a jerk. And then over time, for some reason, your behavior weirdly transforms, and either you can't stand it and you scream and yell and you get out of there, or you conform. I mean, there is that potential that you're self-aware enough to realize what's going on and you do your best, but you're not in a good position. You're under all this pressure all the time. In fact, that's the best thing you can do really is when you join an organization, join one where you can see that the upper leadership is going to encourage you to be the kind of leader that you know you should be, as opposed to you're going to go in there and show them how to do it. You can't show them how to be a good leader if they're above you because of this thing, because of this dynamic here. So molding the latter in its image. Change flows downward rather than upward. The core aspects of leadership style, for example, replicate downward through the hierarchy, overriding individual style. I say the core aspects of leadership style. there are certain aspects of leadership style that you could look at, like how does communication occur? Is communication kind of one way? That would be a directive style of leadership, right? Is it kind of both ways? That'd be more participative style of leadership, or upper left-hand quadrant, person-oriented leadership, when information is going both ways. You have an open discussion with people. You're as much a friend as you are a person in charge, right? People don't think of you as, uh-oh, here's a leader, we're going to get out of here, and let's hide from him. And that's what it looks like in the person-oriented axis. So the core aspect of leadership. Secretiveness is a core aspect of leadership. I mean, just because if you're secretive about stuff in the upper hierarchy, then it spills downward. Pretty soon there's a lot of secretiveness going on. For some reason, it's one of those things. So the core aspects of leadership. All right, so that's fractality. Very interesting. We'll see that later in various ways. Bridging versus buffering, because that's the Lin article. This is important information. Remember the Lin article, if you read the whole thing, you're like, yeah, but look at all these weird organizations they got in there. See, well, yeah, but that's not all our organizations. The Lin article is talking about all types of organizations, not just your productive ones. Productive organizations all essentially follow the technical core, that structure, or there's a technical core there. When we say technical core, we don't mean it's an old factory and nobody touches it or anything like this. We just mean that there's a productive process inside it that needs to be protected. And this is slightly metaphorical, but outside of it, there's this buffer zone where change happens more quickly. Change how? Well, your leaders and your staff and you're thinking thoughts before you put the thoughts into place. You're thinking, hey, how about this idea? How about that idea? There's a lot of flexibility in there because you in the outer zone are listening to what's going on out there in the environment. We need to do more of this, more of that. And so then when you transmit those ideas, when they finally become concrete enough, and then you put them into the structure, you go in there and you make specific changes to the structure. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Maybe you're going to do some quality enhancement or something. But the structure gets protected. So the alternative is if the organization is just kind of open to the environment, whatever the environment does, it just gets pushed around. Then it's not an organization. It can't just be made into a bunch of fluff and then blown apart. So there has to be something going on like that. It's not quite the same thing as levels of analysis, the internal level of analysis most protected now, because we know levels of analysis don't work like that. Individuals, groups, the organization. It's not like the individuals are the non-changing part, so that wouldn't be the right way to look at it. But there is a technical core of a bunch of people and tools in there. There's your complex of socio-technical systems, you might say, right there in the middle. And that's what ends up getting, it follows more machine-like properties. So here's how I describe this. I say, bridging is a high equipotentiality dynamic. We're using the term equipotentiality. What we mean is that, let's say you have a group of people in an organization. There's a group, and they're supposed to work together, but it's everybody does kind of the same job, let's say, in that group of people. Well, in that group of people, then, you can swap roles and nothing changes. Now, let's say you have a team structure, another group of people, now it's a team. They interact a lot, and the roles are distinctive. But let's say somebody's not there one day and somebody else assumes the role. Okay, well, then you adapted to that as well. That's equipotentiality. It's like easy to replace the missing person. So basically, equipotentiality means you got a bunch of folks, whatever they're doing, and you can swap them, and it's okay. It still works. When you think about this, think of stem cells. Used to be a big debate over stem cells. There are these cells that you can get from certain parts of the body, and abortion was a big deal because little babies have a lot of these stem cells. Cells that can turn into pretty much anything. If you put them in a certain environment, the cell will turn into this thing. Put it in a different cellular environment, they turn into that thing instead. So a cell is like, I'm a cell, I can become anything I want. That's a stem cell. Well, in an equipotential system, a group of people, each individual is a stem cell. Now, what happens naturally over time in self-organizing processes, here's this group, and over time, let's just pretend it's a group of people in the organization, and they have a bit of an articulation of, I finish this part, I give it to Joe, he finishes that part, and there's a little of that going on. That kind of articulated group structure. All right, then over time, let's say nothing changes, and these people keep doing those same jobs. They get better and better and better at those same jobs. And pretty soon, there's less of a, oh no, Joe's absent, what do we do? Say, well, I don't know, I guess we'll just have to leave that for tomorrow, because now nobody knows what Joe's job is anymore. Well, they sort of do, but they see him doing it really fast, and they can't do it. And so the replacement possibility starts declining. Pretty soon, that structure gets a little bit rigidified. Equipotentiality is decreasing. That's the term, equipotentiality. It's this idea that everything can turn into anything. And so we say a high equipotentiality dynamic. Bridging, therefore, is the term that Lin came up with. I don't particularly like it that much. I understand why he came up with that one, but it's fine. Anyway, so bridging is like your outer layer, the peripheral part of the structure of an organization. The leaders, the managers, all the boundary spanners, they're all in that layer. And what are they doing? They're very much in tune with all the changes out in the environment. So in the organization, they're talking about these things a lot. They talk with each other, they have planning meetings, they have brainstorming meetings, and they're always thinking of possible ways to improve the organization. Maybe we need to get rid of that unit. Maybe we need a new unit that does this. Maybe we need to do quality management. Maybe we, all these possibilities. And when they finally come to a decision, then they go in and they do something in the technical core, replace something and add something, refine something, without unraveling the technical core. I say it's a high equipotentiality dynamic because we're talking in systems terms. These people in the outer layer, there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of interaction, they could replace each other. Buffering then is the opposite. Again, I don't quite like his terms, but you get used to it. Buffering is the sense of trying to protect that technical core. The buffering is like, here's a wall. Can't get past this wall unless we do it on purpose. So the technical core is free to behave like a machine as much as necessary over time and keep on producing its stuff. Say, well, if you have a value-adding system, a whole bunch of processes all connected to each other, taking inputs and turning them into outputs and selling them, well, that system's got to stay in place pretty well. It acts like there are people in it all over the place, but it acts like a machine. So so no matter what we say, even though we love this idea of open systems and everything, there's always a machine-like aspect of an organization. We'll call that the technical core, where people are engaged in jobs, a lot of which are repetitive in certain ways. And then there's simply a question of, well, to what extent does the technical core, let's say, become amenable to subtle changes, adaptability over time? But in Lin's article, we're not worried about that. We'd say technical core is protected. The peripheral thing, the bridging part, is quasi-protected. It's that's like an outer boundary, and that's the picture of things. So I say central subsystems where productive processes occur change slowly due to buffering. Peripheral subsystems where leadership resides and all the boundary spanners change quickly due to their more direct exposure to outside forces. Thus, the system maintains its integrity while simultaneously adapting to external forces. So you're adapting in kind of a careful, layered way. One may expect internal differentiation to increase over the course of a system's life cycle. Internal differentiation is the thing that naturally happens as an organization, as a self-organizing system grows. And it's the opposite of high equipotentiality. As you get more differentiation, let's say you have a group of people and pretty soon they can't swap jobs anymore because they're so set in their ways, and they get little staff members or something to help them, whatever. Well, equipotentiality is declined. Internal differentiation, by definition, has gone up. It's almost like they built little walls among themselves, even though they see each other in the same room. Right, so that's the opposite. All right, socio-technical systems. Here I say, describe socio-technical systems in terms of systems theory. How do tools interact with behavioral resources to generate the system? I give you a really weird word here from sociology, sociomateriality. So in human organizations, behavioral resources consist of human activity loaned by participants in the system, as it were, to drive the entity. Behaviors act on both tools and other behaviors. When I say behaviors, right? Again, human beings are not the raw material of an organization. It's their behaviors. Human beings come in, I got behaviors, I got a brain, I got two arms, and I'm going to do stuff here while I'm here. And when the day is over, I'm not going to leave. It's like the organization's still there because the pattern will repeat tomorrow. Maybe there's a night shift, who knows. But we want to keep in mind that as a technicality, we want to be able to say, it's exchange of behaviors. Behavioral exchange is the structure of an organization. There are these behaviors going on. People talking to each other, that's behaviors. People moving things around. There's stuff moving around, behaviors. So we say human resources is not really accurate because it's behavioral resources. If you want to be strict about it, and I think it's helpful to be strict sometimes. So I say behavioral resources consist of human activity loaned by participants in the system, as it were, to drive the entity. I say it's loaned. They come in there and for a while they're like, okay, I'll do this work, and they leave. They come back in, they do the work again. They parcel out, the rest of their lives for so many hours, and then they return to their lives afterwards. So they're loaning you their talent. You could say talent as well. Talent's got other implications, but so behaviors act on both tools and other behaviors. Of course they do. If I'm using a machine or I'm talking to you through this mechanism, I'm interacting with tools. You're interacting with tools as well, and it seems like we're in the same room to some limited extent. Over time, it improves. So tools then act on behaviors. How does that? Well, you go online to your bank, and by the time you're done with all that transaction, you realize I just talked to a bunch of robots. I didn't talk to any humans at all. Everything was a robot asking me to do this and do that. I obeyed the robot. We obey robots all over the place now. Back in the day, you would still work around the limitations of your tools, but nowadays there's robots all over the place. Anyway, so the tools now act on other tools in modern times. The result is a socio-material structure, wherein the distinction between actors and the material infrastructure blurs. The actors are the behavioral exchange. The material infrastructure, that's also interacting with everything. So it's kind of like the perfect finishing point of what started out as what we recognize as a socio-technical system. The socio-material structure is essentially another way to describe a socio-technical system. But socio-material, the word there, has more of a one blurs into the other kind of aspect than in the old days when it's people with tools, chopping the side of a hill trying to find coal in it or something. It was socio-technical. Made sense when you're having like an individual sitting there with a typewriter and a couple of pieces of equipment, and I'm working, and I'm a little bitty system of one person and some tools, little tiny socio-technical system. The socio-material structure becomes more complex. It's much more enmeshing of one and the other. Pretty soon it's hard to tell what starts and the other ends. People don't know what they're thinking about it. And so I say both facets of the open system contribute to the cycles of events that define the system. So there it is, socio-technical systems, the socio-material structure. Okay, leadership factors. Here's Burke. Explain the two universal leadership factors. There's another way to put them, universal. You can say it that way. In terms of systems theory. Now this is really tough. What does each factor do in theoretical terms? Say, well, that's really tough. Do you know, by the way, for those of you who study leadership, and if you remember leader-member exchange theory, they started out as vertical dyad linkers, they changed the name. Leader-member exchange theory, or LMX theory. It turned out to be, here's what was going on. So George Grain and his doctoral students were trying to conceptualize a new kind of leadership, basically reconceptualize leadership in the sense of, if you understand organizations as open systems, what does leadership look like in those terms? Because prior to that, it's like, well, leadership is human beings with human minds doing human things. So an open system. You'd have to argue this. Is an anthill a complex system? Well, yes, it is. The ants, they're moving around, they're creating an anthill, complex system. Okay, well, is leadership, in some sense, a universal property of complex systems? You say, well, yeah, I think it is, but clearly ants aren't the same. All right, now what does leadership look like if you look at the ants? Well, okay, that's a good question. Maybe they share leadership? Anyways, what they found was this. In order to conceptualize leadership in the context of systems theory, you have to kind of take this perspective. You look at it from a distance, as it were. You're looking at the organization as though from the sky. You see people moving around. Kind of like ants, but they're people. And then you notice that some people are visited by others more often than other people are. So, well, that's the objective, visible property of leadership. The person that interacts with others more than anybody else does. Well, that must be a leader. You kind of break it down and say, yeah, it makes sense, and why do people go to him? Yeah, so that ends up being a leader. So then they describe LMX in terms of the extent to which an individual in a leadership position interacts kind of in an open and productive way with subordinates. Not necessarily just telling them what to do, but a real openness of these factors. And so what you end up with is the LMX leader has subordinates who really like the LMX leader because there's a lot of interaction. Well, that's where it came from. It was just purely systems theory. All right, so let's work through this one. The two main leadership factors are initiating structure and consideration, whatever you want to call them, but that's what Fleischman called them. Initiating structure, privileging the needs of each task. I decided to describe it this way here because I think that's a nice way to do it. Increases vertical differentiation, hence a case of positive feedback. So that's weird. Well, yeah, but it does. Think about this. Pretend you're in charge of a committee or a group of people, and you're supposed to be working together like a team. And you're put in charge, and then you decide, well, you know what, I'm smarter than all these other people on this team. I'm just going to tell them what to do. That'll be a lot easier. All right, folks, look, I'm in charge now. My way or the highway. You do this, you do that, you do this other thing, you do this, and that's it. You say, well, that sounds like it's not going to work. It won't work. It'll destroy the whole team. So why is it, though? Why? Why not just be in charge, tell them all what to do? It doesn't work as a team. It's no longer a team. It's no longer a committee. It's no longer a hierarchy-free structure. So you've turned it into a hierarchy. And you've relegated people who are supposed to be in a position to contribute into being just extensions of yourself. So they're tools. And then from the perspective of this consideration aspect of leadership, you see it also makes everybody really kind of angry and they want to leave. You're like, oh, so this structure, this particular structure, a committee or a team, or whatever, it is such that consideration is a really important property. I need to show people respect. I need to treat them like equals. I have to, otherwise the structure doesn't work. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. All right, so if I do the opposite and it fits the nature of what you're doing, a dangerous work environment, emergency service, or something like this, or subordinates who really need to know what to do, and I've been there for a long time, they just got here, maybe. All right, well then you're going to increase vertical differentiation. In the sense of, you decide, I'm going to tell everyone what to do on my team. What you've done is you've taken a flat organization and you've elevated yourself above it. See, you've increased vertical differentiation over the team members. Same thing happens in a committee. You can't have a committee and just tell people what to do because you're relegating them to being unproductive. They're not going to be able to contribute anything. So it is an increase in vertical differentiation. That's the structural thing that's going on. Now, if you're increasing vertical differentiation, you are engaging in a positive feedback loop. I didn't have to bring that in, but since we talked about it last week, I thought, well, let's bring that in where it fits. It is a case of positive feedback. You're creating an imbalance of some kind. It needs to be made up for by some other thing. You're creating an imbalance. You're going to effectuate action through the power structure by doing this. The imbalance, I guess, comes in this form. Remember what I said, if you treat your team as though they're just subordinates, they have to obey you, then their actions become extensions of your own ideas, not their ideas. So all those brains on the team that are supposed to contribute to this dynamic interaction that creates these great output, right, ends up being, it's just you with a bunch of arms. It's you with extra arms. And you're only one person. You're not nearly as smart as if everybody can somehow get all those brains to come together and gel. So you think, well, when would you do that? Well, when my brain is the only thing that's important. Like I have a bunch of novices looking at me waiting to be told what to do. Okay, well, then my brain's what's important. Or the emergency structure, that sort of thing. All right, now, then you're like, well, what's the other thing going on? Consideration, privileging the needs of each person. It reduces vertical differentiation, hence a case of negative feedback, to bring about action by distributing power, thus increasing adaptability. So what else are you doing? Well, you're increasing equipotentiality too. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? So yeah, I've joined a team. Let's say we're a bunch of team members, and we decided we got our roles, and the roles are designed to kind of keep you separate from each other. Make you needed. I got this role, it's my role, I'm going to do it. But the fact is, you can swap roles in some sense if you have to. It's like, oh, well, so-and-so's missing. Who's going to do this? Oh, I'll do it. All right, well, you put another way, though. ignoring the role action, just say, look, it's a non-hierarchical structure. It's a bunch of people being productive without anybody lording over them. They're all maximally thinking thoughts and contributing. It's very dynamic, it's a lot of energy. There is maximum adaptability. It's maximum equipotentiality. It's a completely equipotential team. I mean, in a philosophical way, it's not completely. You can say if it's identical people, but then that sort of screws up the whole process. They can't be identical and be extremely productive. Anyway, but it's high equipotentiality. So what are you doing? Well, you're breaking down vertical differentiation. You're using negative feedback. Is this a case of that breakdown I talked about last time, the catabolic process? And I say, no, it's not. So why is it not catabolic? Well, I mean, you could try to force that into place just as a thought exercise, but the fact is, it's not catabolic in nature any more than, let's say, that the increasing vertical differentiation is anabolic. It's a structural change. But it's not catabolic in this sense either, because catabolic in terms of behaviors would mean you're trying to break down the differences between the people and what the organization needs of the people so that you can start using them. It's just like when you get all the boxes in the shipping the shipping deck, and you open up all the boxes so you can get all the stuff ready, and then you move the stuff into place. You're doing all this activity in an organization to break down the difference between these resources you just received and their optimum placement so you can use them. So there's a whole bunch of work going on just breaking them down, just putting them in place. That's all negative feedback. That's all catabolic in nature. So this is a little bit different. We're talking about the vertical differentiation line, really. We're not talking about horizontal. We're not trying to conform people. We're not trying to make them the same. That would be catabolism in the sense of assimilation. And I know Bert Lampe does talk about assimilation as well. There is assimilating that goes on. You can say, well, what happens in a team that is assimilation? Well, that's when you adopt the norms. When you norm, when you get through the whole norming process, you've assimilated as much as needs to happen in a team. You've assimilated along the lines of what a team needs. You don't assimilate in every way. You don't like suddenly become thinking the same thoughts all the time. But norms are your assimilation. Like at an organization level, culture is your assimilation. You've assimilated, now you're part of the culture. That's all you needed to do because it's an attitudinal thing. It's an attitudinal and behavioral thing at the same time. That's assimilation. So yeah, there's nice deep stuff. And here's the most difficult one down here, force field analysis and systems thinking. Both Riley and Swanson. So I say, explain Riley's notion of forces for or against change by reference to Swanson's leverage points. And I say, this question requires some systems thinking. What I'm trying to do here is correct the record up front before you get to it too much. That people too often will look up Levine's force field analysis and they'll draw all the wrong conclusions. They think force field analysis, you just go online, force field analysis, Levine, you see all this stuff, and most of it's wrong. They'll do this sort of thing. Here's a force field analysis at work. Okay, here's all the reasons for change, and here's all the reasons against change. Oh, that's force field analysis. No, it's not. That is not force field analysis. So I'll explain it like this. A correct understanding of Levine's force field analysis presents forces as leverage points. I said, what is that? Well, we're trying to change this one thing here. We've identified the forces that influence this thing. One there, one there, one there. We've got half a dozen of these things. Some of them are easy to influence than others. We're going to call those leverage points and then work with them. Okay, makes sense. So in this conception, every equilibrium state that you see anywhere, like you go into an organization, let's say back in the day, and you decide you're going to measure leadership. It looks like you guys are strong in directive leadership, but not all that strong in person-oriented. We're going to train you to be strong in person-oriented. But you see numbers. There's a number up there. It's a 3 or a 3.5 or some number that indicates you're strong in one, weak in the other. Okay, well, what are you trying to do? You're trying to raise the other way. You're trying to raise the consideration number. You see a low number, you want to make it higher. Well, if you go to Blake and Wooten, you see a 2.3 or a 4.7 or something, and you want to turn it to a 9.9. There's a number difference. It's really easy to see. And so what Levine says is, he doesn't say, well, it's just all about you train them. I mean, obviously, in that particular context, you're talking about leaders who can't manifest consideration behaviors very well, so you train them. But in other contexts, it may be other forces you're looking at. So here we have, in this conception, every equilibrium state, whatever that number is, you're looking at manifest some metric of interest. For example, you might see a temperature shown by a thermometer. You might see the crime rate reported by the police department. I think that was mentioned in Levine's 1947 paper. He talked about the crime rate. How do you change the crime rate? Well, I say, well, there are forces pushing up on it, forces pushing down on it. Figure out what those forces are, do a little brainstorming, some analysis, and find a force that you can actually do something with. You want the crime rate to go down, so if a force is pushing down and you can think, well, we can manage that one there, then focus on it and do something. If force is pushing up and you can weaken one of them, then focus on that one. So then the number changes. That's the whole point of force field analysis. There are forces pushing up and down on a metric as a number, like on a scale. Well, that's always what that was. So certain forces push up on the metric while other forces push down. A careful analysis of the force reveals which ones are easiest to influence, thus offering a way to change the metric of interest. Which ones are easiest to influence? Those are your leverage points. And that's how that finishes. Take one more little break and we'll talk about the team project for this week. And last but not least, let's move into the team project. And of course, you've seen this. So I have this. There's a lot of detail on here. I try to fill the page. There's always more you could say, but I try to fit whatever I can in. So when executed with the substantive participation of the whole team, team charter strength and team effectiveness. this is research-based fact. It's has an enormous impact. I have seen teams, though, of course, in which the people just treated the whole team charter thing like well, we're supposed to do this stupid thing, all right, let's do it. And they didn't take it seriously, and then they wound up demonstrating a lot of problems along the way. The team charter, as much as possible, needs to have everybody like voicing, chiming in. So I say, to prepare your team charter, address the elements listed below in addition to any other criteria deemed appropriate in your preferred style. And I didn't give you a look, make it look like this kind of thing, because it really needs to be your own style. That's a really important part of this. So then I ask you to find an image to embed in the charter and affix it to each team product to reflect your team's adoptive identity. That's important too, because the point is you're trying to create a sense of, the sense of identity is goes beyond just the simple fact of having put together this, well, we got this agreement here. But you create an identity out of it, and it has a big impact on the team's ability to be cohesive and work together. It's a motivation thing. All right, so I say structural priorities. Now, this particular handout, I've listed your 4 structural elements. The team structure consists of 4 elements. Team structure consists fundamentally of at least 2 elements, roles and norms. Those have to be there no matter what for the team to be effective. But research shows that adopting clarifying a superordinate goal and, of course, strategy, that step adds measurably to team performance. And why would that be? Well, there's a certain logic to it. You can kind of see by the definition. If you know what your superordinate goal is, then, okay, everybody, we know where we're going. And if you know your core strategy, everybody knows, here's what we agreed on. This is going to be our path. Now, it's easiest to understand when you think in terms of core business strategy and Porter's model. I mentioned that last time, because in fact the one study that shows effectiveness was based on that structure. So there's a little less than perfect harmony between that and this particular. The team is not a private enterprise; it's a team, right? And it's like a consulting team trying to help an organization. So it's not going to have like, what do we do about our retail or anything like that? What do we do about, we got to make more shoes? There's none of that going to be in there. No value added. But still, the principles work effectively as long as you understand them right and you're able to discuss them. So I say roles, norms, superordinate goal, and core strategy. Address each structural priority using the guiding points below based on team deliberations. Teams need to be talking. So roles. How do we ensure that each of us contributes essential work to the team with no redundancy? That would be the ideal. You want to be able to do that. Now, I don't mean that only one person does a thing and nobody else contributes to that thing. What I do mean is that one person's role is, I'm the one who does this. And yeah, I need feed-in from you guys to help, but I'm the one who, I'm the buck stops here kind of thing about this particular role. The point being that each role has to be distinct enough so that you need me. That's the most important ingredient of a role. If you can't do it without you, and I'm going to talk about equipotentiality, but so we're not talking about I can do something nobody else can do. I said I've agreed to do something that everyone else has agreed to leave to me, and at most they contribute ideas and throw things at me, but they don't try to do my job for me. They expect me to show up. If the team needs me, it's fundamentally a question of the team expects you to show up, and they're not doing your role because they expect you to do it. That means you are necessary. So need doesn't come from I can do something no one else can do. It comes from the expectation. So the team is a mutual web of expectations. If you get 2 people doing literally the same thing, then you have this sense of, well, why do I need to do it? You're doing it, And you say, well, that sounds so mundane. Yeah, but that's where free riding comes from. So roles need to make everybody different. So how do you ensure that we all contribute essential work to the team with no redundancy? Here's a list of common responsibilities of this kind of team, which the team may wish to organize into roles distributed to team members. These aren't all, but they're close to all. They're close to most of the things that you think of. You might think of something else. Okay, there's this thing called a team leader. Defends structural priorities, submits team products, acts as a regular point of contact with the instructor. That's plenty of stuff to worry about. I got to keep everybody on track. When they're discussing, I have to say, wait a minute, but that's beyond our scope or something like that. I got to be able to guide people. Maybe I'll set the right tone at the beginning of meetings. Send out the agenda. That's my job too as a team leader. I have an agenda specialist down here where we can separate that off. But again, there's so many of these that might just as well be the team leader. And you know, in real life, most of the time, the team leader or whoever's running the team, if that person does not have an assistant to do this, there's no secretary, let's say, like in the old sense. It's like, I got to write my own agenda and send it to everybody. And you really don't want to have team meetings without an agenda coming out first. In time for people to open them and read them. Subject matter expert. Okay, somebody's got to take that role. Now, what I mentioned in addition, though, is that you may not know who's going to be in that role until this thing is done. This week, I'm going to be talking about possibilities. Hey, so whose organization? Well, my organization does this, and we have this process. My organization does that, and we have that process, and people are talking about possibilities. But you don't need to have come to a conclusion regarding who is going to be your subject matter expert. What is that core process going to be that you're looking at until next week? So that one may be like, well, everybody takes on these other roles, and at most you've discussed possibilities, but you're going to finalize that next week. In some cases, you might say, well, so-and-so's process is so great, we're going to do this, we already know. Okay, fine. Then maybe you do designate a subject matter expert this week, but you don't have to. Maintains contact with the subject organization, provides rich detail and context. Record specialist, organizes and maintains all project records. Each of these things needs to be done by somebody. And that's how it works. So minutes specialist takes minutes of team meetings. Nobody wants to do that, but you know what I used to do when I would run regular meetings? Haven't had to do this in a while, but when I ran my meetings, I would be like, okay, I would come up with an agenda, and then pass out the agenda, and we're talking, and then on the agenda, I'd take notes, and I would use the agenda with extra notes saying like who was there and everything else, and the agenda then converts into my minutes. I don't want more people don't do that. Just add notes to the agenda and send it out again. You're done. Nice and simple. A proofreader advises and reviews drafts for mechanical correctness. Somebody's got to pay attention to that, right? APA stylist. That's a nice little name. Advises and reviews drafts on APA style. Only APA style. I'm going to get good at it. Here's the other thing about roles. You adopt a role, and since you have that role, you have an opportunity to get good at it. Dig up things, read things, get some background info. And when it's your turn to talk, you say, well, this past week I looked into this, and so I thought this would be interesting. You need to know this, that, and this. Right? Instead of like, well, I'm just the APA stylist. Don't talk to me during this meeting. Wait till it's time for me to look at something. So no, always have something to say. And that something is going to say something about what you do between meetings. AI specialists, investigates, recommends AI applications. Some of you are in the AI concentration, which is a perfect opportunity to be that person. AI watchdog. It'd be nice if you can separate that, have somebody else be the AI watchdog, only because, the AI specialist can do that too. Advises and reviews drafts for AI issues. But it's better to be somebody else, and you're like, well, this looks weird. How'd that happen? And the AI specialist says, oh, well, the AI did that. And everybody says, yeah, it does look weird, doesn't it? If it looks weird, it's probably a hallucination or an anomaly of some kind. So AI watchdog would be somebody looking for the stuff that seems out of whack. It could be caused by AI. Facticity watchdog. Somebody's got to review the facts. If you leave it to AI to give you some facts, you got to look at them all. And you might give it to one person and say, okay, look, we're all going to be looking, trying to verify these facts here, but one person's responsibility is going to be like, all I did when I reviewed this draft is there's a fact, there's a fact, there's a fact, and I did my best to look them up, and I came back and told everybody about them, or maybe I sent a mail out and say, here's what I found. I'm not sure about some of them. Some of you can reconfirm because I think this is what I have. Right? But one person drives that train, you see. We have a researcher, finds and distributes research articles to meet team project needs. So somebody's like, look, I know I got to go to the Troy Library online, and so I'll do my best to come up with any research articles required by a particular phase. There are no research articles in this first phase. But, once we ask for that, it's kind of just a way to get some structure down, and we need you to kind of practice that anyway. But you have one person looking up these research articles who might say, hey, anybody else see an article out there? I would like you all to kind of look around because, I'm open. I mean, it's me, but right, that's that feed-in thing. Everybody has a role, but you want other people to send you stuff. You want everybody to be aware enough to send you stuff every now and then. Hey, I saw this error. Hey, I saw this article. Hey, I don't think that article will work. Whatever. And then we have designer, reviews drafts for aesthetic balance, flow, and professionalism. So I've seen strangely cobbled together documents where it's like, wait a minute, one person did that part, another person did this. Sometimes it was different fonts. Talk about cheap, goodness. Well, somebody's got to be able to say, look, for aesthetic flow and everything, for our professional style, we want it to be like this. I hope somebody is not too eccentric. You don't really want eccentric stuff. Okay, then we get norms. So roles are what makes us all different on a team. Norms are what makes us all the same on a team. That's, of course, our measure of assimilation. We are assimilated once norms set in and we're all following them. That's just, again, we're all different people. But when we're all working in harmony, it's that aspect of assimilation that counts in a team. We don't have to think the same thoughts. We just have to work in harmony with each other. So what patterns of interaction should we follow? Here is a list of common interacting predictive norms. So how shall we communicate? So adopt a fair response time for communication of different kinds. See what you're trying to do with norms, by the way, is norms are going to set in eventually in a team anyway. You're trying to get ahead of the natural process, though. So you're trying to pin them down as much as possible. And then the pushing and pulling and the natural team behavior, team evolution, will put some pressure on some of these things anyway, and they might mutate. But you try as hard as you can to adopt them up front. So they're not like rules. They're not like, well, if you violate that rule, you're going to be punished somehow. They're norms. As the team continues to do its stuff over the weeks, if some norm just seems like, well, that was a little over the top, we're being a little too specific about that. Clearly, that's not what we can do in terms of punctuality or in terms of who knows what it is. Could be that you say, yeah, we're going to have meetings every week, everything's going to be great. And then it turns out somebody on the other side of the world or has to communicate in an asynchronous way, and you got to like, well, we hadn't thought about that, so let's do something about that. So norms are what you try to do up front, knowing that they're going to change a little bit as you go. So fair response time for communication of different kinds, like what's 24 hours, what's 48 hours, that sort of thing. When you sequence like several steps of a review process over a week, because 24-hour turnaround seems almost like a long time in some cases. But it could be that that's all you can do. How we'll make decisions. So there are different decision protocols. We have consensus decision making. Maybe but you got to think it through. Are there certain kinds of decisions where we just leave it to the team leader? Are there certain kinds of decisions where we take a vote? Just think that through. It's not really an easy answer to those questions, but there are ways to do it. Just don't get too nitpicky. It's like it's not worth the time to get like a whole list of different kinds of decisions and all that kind of stuff. Just figure out what makes the most sense. Have that discussion. How will we stay in touch? There's timing. There's what electronic medium or media you use. And there's frequency. How often do we communicate? And the ideal structure for a team is minimum you meet every week, and then in between the weeks, individuals are doing stuff for the next meeting. But to do it really well, I mean, it's like you're touching bases at least one-on-one in various ways, various times and places with different people during the week, so that by the time the meeting happens, I've heard from 3 or 4 members of the team in different ways. Somebody sent me a text message, somebody sent me an email. Sometimes it wasn't very substantive. Hey, how you doing? I found this, whatever. But all that is a plus. All the various random times and places and one-on-one meetings in between team meetings is a powerful generator of team cohesion and team development. We know of it in terms of TMX. TMX is a horizontal analog of LMX that I talked about earlier. All right, so how will we support one another? For example, AI Watchdog cannot catch all AI hallucinations. Maybe, but just don't count on it. Proofreader cannot catch all mistakes. Researchers should not remove others' responsibility to find good sources. You can't be like, well, I'm not going to look up any sources. That's the researcher's job. I got my own job. You don't want to differentiate yourself so much that you're not contributing. So why is that in theoretical terms? Let's say each person does I only do this role, that's my job description, it's not my job description, the other stuff. And they don't do anything else. Well, then what you're doing is you're destroying equipotentiality in the team. You're creating divisions within the team. The roles then become boundaried instead of just differences in expectations. The roles are supposed to be manifestations of your expectation to be there and to do these things. They're not supposed to be your job description and you don't do anything else. So it's got to be an interaction as well. I know it's tough, but that's the nature of teams. How will we manage meetings? Maybe different meeting types. Do you have informational meetings, decisional meetings? If you only have one meeting a week, you're going to have to, okay, information first, maybe information collection, then decision or whatever. But anyway, at least think it through. What kind of meetings you should have. Might have different kinds of segments. Might have 2 different meetings during the week because people are on funny sides of the world and Certain people can meet in this one and certain people in that one. There's a little overlap. Who knows? There's possibilities. How will we work? Work to accomplish between meetings. How to manage draft rotation for reviews, ensuring 100% participation among team members. Like, okay, you ever been part of a committee and nobody does anything in between meetings? You want to avoid that. So in between meetings, you have to do something for the team. Got to figure out how to make that work. How do we ensure psychological safety? Extremely important point. Members should feel free to voice their true opinions and feelings, no group think. So you're like, a lot of times we say, okay, when we're during in this phase of the meeting, no judgment, or things like this. That becomes a norm, so that people are free to say whatever they want, air their grievances, whatever they want to say. You might say, no blaming, no pointing fingers, things like this. And so I say, especially during brainstorming, you don't want any groupthink there. How will we ensure participative equality? Also important. Those two, psychological safety, participative equality, are high on the list of what you really, really, really need to worry about. Members should have the same chance to participate, turn taking, sharing the team interaction space. One approach that has worked in the past in various teams is you'll have, like, let's say the team leader, usually the team leader. I have the agenda, I have the people I invited there, I put them at the top. This is how I used to do my own agendas. The names would be at the top with little boxes by it. And so when I'm taking my notes, I can, as soon as somebody says something, I very discreetly kind of put a little tick mark by the person's name. And then another person talks, and a little tick mark, and pretty soon, when I have about 10 minutes to go, 10, 15 minutes to go, it's the team time, because you want to hold to time as well, you don't want to go over. Then I'm like, okay, hey, we need, Jack, do you have something else to say? And I'd be saying that because I don't have enough tick marks by Jack. By the time I'm done, I have approximately the same number of tick marks by everybody, and everybody, I've basically created this participative equality through that process. Very hands-on, very simple, very important at the same time. How will we amend the charter? Think about the rules by which you would amend the charter. And one simple thing is like, hey, next week we're going to find our subject matter expert. Let's amend the charter and assign the role. Okay, no problem. We'll come together. We'll pass this thing around using, I don't know, Microsoft document, what you call those things, document sharing profiles. And when you update it, everybody agrees, click, yes, 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 okay, boom, all of a sudden there's a change. It could be as simple as that, but come up with something. And then how do we handle irresolvable disputes? There will be some possibilities of cases where you say, oh, okay, we're not going to solve this. We've got to ask Dr. Boss to come in and, hey, Dr. Boss, we all agree that so-and-so needs to be kicked out. That kind of thing can happen. So there is such a thing. A majority of team members may submit issues to the instructor if needed. For example, removal of a team member. It's these big things that you can't solve. Instructor's role in such a case is arbitrator, whose decisions are binding. And there's no guarantee, by the way, if you say, we all voted, we need this person to be gotten rid of. So, well, it could be that you haven't tried hard enough, and I'll have conversations with you trying to figure out what happened. Or that could happen. But you know what? I've never had that case in a graduate course where they wanted to get rid of a team member. I've only had that in undergraduate. There's a maturity difference, and people in graduate courses often have such a strong life experience and work experience that they know these things pretty well by now. So superordinate goal, then, how will we advance a client organization's mission? That's your superordinate goal. It's how will we advance that organization's mission. Define the superordinate goal as the benefits sought on behalf of the client organization to be a successful project execution, not the superficial aim of writing a case analysis. Your goal is not to write a case analysis. It's to help that organization. Identifying the client organization's mission is essential to this definition. So their mission is this. The team then focuses on one aspect of that mission. It could be that it's a unit mission, if you're helping something in a unit, for example, as opposed to the whole organization. You don't want to be like, we're trying to improve, we're trying to offer suggestions for this battalion to improve how it does this, and the Army's mission is that, right? That's too far apart. It's got to be the battalion's mission in that case. Here's some common mission imperatives, just a lot of different ideas. It could be you're after efficiency, you're trying to help them become more efficient, saving resources, effectiveness, meeting mission priorities, quality, reducing process error, employee learning and growth, perhaps. That comes from Kaplan and Norton's model. Precision, reliability, customer satisfaction, reputation, adaptability. Lots of superordinate goals that you can come up with. And then core strategy is what path will lead us to achieving our superordinate goal. Now it's what quality in the team we're going to focus on the most, as opposed to what quality in the receiving organization we're focusing on. The answer is your strategic operating objective. The operating objective is the principle that guides how the team functions, as opposed to how the client organization functions, in the pursuit of its superordinate goal. If you were a private company, your core strategy would be your generic strategy. We're going to follow a cost leadership process. We're going to follow a differentiation process. We're going to follow a focus process. But no, we're not doing that, obviously, because you're not a private company. So think in terms of other kinds of terms that refer to the path that you follow. Entrepreneurial resourcefulness, that's going to be what we focus on. Entrepreneurial resourcefulness, be as creative as you possibly can be. How about speed and focus? How about creativity and inventiveness? How about learning and discovery? Accuracy and attention to detail. Maybe we're going to be all about Kaizen. Enough of us know about it. Let's do that. Constant process. So we're improving the team process each time. We're revisiting. We're talking about high energy team member involvement, technological sophistication, streamlined sequencing and interaction, imperative strategy and compliance. And here's what I mean, by the way, about core strategy. Let's say you're a platoon. You've been separated because you're out there in the battlefield. And your battalion's gone, you got to get back to headquarters, but you're the platoon. You're on top of a hill someplace, and your headquarters is way over there. So what do? Do you go as fast as you can in a straight line to headquarters? That would be one operating objective. It may be wrong. Maybe the enemy's out there. Do you sneak around in the tree line? That would be another one. But either way, right, you can kind of see there's physical manifestation of an operating objective. It's like, how do you get from here to there? What are you worried about along the way? What is the best approach? And it's like more than one approach is good in case of team operation. So get together and try to think of something that feels like the best and say, we're going to try to adhere to that principle, and then that means in practical terms this, that, and the other. For example, if you're being inventive, like, all right, dig up some new ideas. Be really out of the box or something, right? Instead of all conventional. If you're going to be Kaizen, then have a process that lets you get together and review how things happened this past week and talk about it. So think about that. I know it's a bit vague in a sense, but once you get into it, it'll become clearer. And last but not least, we have administrative details. List the names of the team members with an attestation that each has articulated a commitment to uphold the terms of the charter. Have each member sign the charter using signature images, and then you'll save it as a PDF file, and then you turn it in. But a PDF file makes sense because you're planting everything and you want to solidify it and then get rid of all those moving objects and stuff. So, with that said, I think that explains things well enough. Just do your best. Come up with that thing. And then we will take it from there. So, with that said, we will call it quits. Wish you all good luck online. And I'll hang out while the music's playing so that we can talk about other stuff if you want to.